what's up, guys? Welcome to Unmatched Philosophy. Today, I am joined with Dr. Eric Sampson. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Eric Sampson. I teach philosophy at Purdue University. I do ethics and metaethics and a little bit of epistemology.
Perfect. So, today, we're going to be talking about some philosophy. And the first question that should be asked is, what is philosophy and why should anyone care?
Yeah, so a lot of things to say about philosophy. I mean, I guess one thing you might do if somebody asks you, like, what is yellow? You might try to describe it to them, but you're not going to do a very good job. The biggest thing you're going to have to do is just like show them some yellow and be like, this is what yellow is. So, I mean, in many ways, philosophy is like that. I can do my best. It's sort of thinking hard about deep and important questions that aren't answered by the sciences. That's typically what I say in my intro classes. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, there's lots of deep and important questions, but many of them are investigated by the sciences. So like, what are the fundamental laws of physics, or what is, reality made of? Those are interesting questions. Those are studied by the physics. Or like, where do we come from? Where did life begin? All that kind of stuff. All interesting questions. But then there are, lots of interesting and important questions that science can answer. Like, how should I conduct my intellectual life? That is, what should I believe in? Why should I believe it? And how should I live? And what's the best thing for me? That is like forget everybody else. Like, how should I benefit myself the most? These are all important questions. Science can help you to some degree, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to tell you like what a good life consists in. You're going to have to do some philosophy to do that. So why should you care? Well, if you think so, there are many ways to answer this too. I mean, one way to hear that question, why should I care, is like, what goals will it help me achieve? What goals of mine will it help me achieve? And to answer that, I need to know your goals. But I mean, many people have the goal of wanting to think clearly about things that are important to them. And philosophy can definitely help you do that. If you don't want to just be a partisan hack, that is just sort of like, saying whatever will sort of get like applause from the people in your in-group. You actually want to think carefully and think about what's true. Then I think you would be interested in philosophy. I think philosophers tend to do a good job of trying to come to good arguments or good reasons for holding various beliefs, trying to see what the limitations of their views are, what the pros and cons are, what's to be said about views that they disagree with. And so I think, if you care about that, that's good. Another way to answer the question is to say, why should I care? Well, you should care because philosophy is good for its own sake. That is, it's good, not necessarily because it'll get you something else. I mean, it will get you some other things, like it'll help you go to law school, and you'll do well on the LSAT if you take a lot of philosophy classes. But another way to answer it is to say, well, why should you do philosophy? Well, why should you play basketball? Why should you, hang out with your parents, or hang out with your family, hang out with your friends? Why should you see movies? Why should you engage in pleasurable activities? Answer, because they're good. They're good for their own sake, not because they're going to go get you something else. And I think philosophy is like that. It's like asking, why should I watch football? Why should I go to, watch a game? Because it's good for its own sake, not because it'll get something else. So yeah, that's another answer.
Perfect. So, with that being said, was there any particular moment or experience that you had that drew you into philosophy?
Well, yeah, I don't know if there was a particular moment. I mean, when I was in undergraduate philosophy, I argued a lot about theological matters. So about like problem of evil and Calvinism. So like, does God, choose who goes to heaven and hell, that sort of thing. And so I argued with my friends a lot about that kind of stuff. And I realized as I was doing that, like I'm using arguments and I'm trying to, garner evidence and show what supports what. I'm basically doing this thing, philosophy. And so I was at the University of Tennessee as an undergraduate. And I saw there were some philosophy classes. I was like, oh, I need to get better at this so I can be better at arguing about stuff. And so I took an intro to philosophy class. And I just remember thinking like, oh, wow, like reality is way more weird and cool and difficult than I thought. And that was my first sort of exposure. So I was like, I want to take another one of these classes. Still wasn't planning to go be a philosopher or anything like that. I was always planning to be a basketball coach and an economics teacher in high school. Like a high school economics teacher and basketball coach. But I took another class, just kept taking classes, kept loving it, kept seeing like, oh, wow, like this is great. I love this. Found out you could go to grad school. If you go to grad school, they'll pay you to go there. So like you don't have to take on any debt. You get free tuition, and then you get to teach, and then they pay you, get to read whatever you want. I was like, oh my God, the best thing. So I decided to do that. And then, once you do that, then you get a PhD and you can teach it. So that's what, that's what I did. At every stage, I was like, look, I can always go back and be a high school teacher and a basketball coach, but I never really wanted to do it. So, yeah.
So, you raised an interesting point that you could go to try to go to your PhD or just try to go to grad school in general. You don't have to incur on any debt or anything of that sort. But what advice would you give to someone who's interested in pursuing philosophy as a career?
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about that. I mean, the first thing is you want to go to an undergrad school where you're going to get a good philosophical education. Maybe I mean, a lot of people, I guess, are already where they are, so they can't really, change anything about that. But then from there, you're going to need to do a lot of research online about how to get into grad school. So there's like certain things you have to do. You have to take the GRE. You have to get a certain score on that. You have to have good letters from your professors, which means you need to hang out with your professors. They need to know you. They need to be impressed by you. That doesn't mean you have to be, obnoxious about it, but they have to sort of, you have to go to class and you have to speak up in class and you have to write good papers and you have to see them in office hours because you need a good letter from them. You're going to need a good writing sample. So that means you're going to have a good paper that lots of people have looked at. And then that's all the stuff that you submit to grad schools. Of course, you got to get into grad school. If you want to do philosophy as a career, you got to get into grad school because they only hire PhDs. And so that's the way to get a PhD. From there, when you're looking at where you want to get a PhD, there are rankings for these things. The Philosophical Gourmet Report is a list of rankings of graduate programs. And so, you want to get as high as you can get because that's going to give you the most options for where you can, be a professional philosopher. So once you get into school from there, you gotta, do well in your classes. Again, you gotta impress your professors. You gotta publish a bunch, and then you go on the job market and you just show them that you're great. And then, if you're sufficiently great, then they'll say, "Here, take this money and teach philosophy for the rest of your life." That's how it works.
And clearly, you were sufficiently great, huh?
Well, I mean, it took a long time, but I mean, in a ton of work. But I mean, I made it. So
You made it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So, who were some of your philosophical influences?
Yeah, I guess in the very early days, I mean, this is a very common story with a guy named William Lane Craig who was doing a lot of apologetic stuff. As I said, I was interested in arguing about theological matters, and just once you do that long enough, you just can't help but hear the name William Lane Craig, and he's very accessible, and he's arguing about important things. At least it seems like he does it pretty well. So I started watching a lot of his debates, reading a lot of his books, getting a sense of how philosophy works. From there, I started, reading more stuff. I got interested in history philosophy, like Plato. I read a ton of Plato, loved Plato, read some Aristotle. I guess contemporary philosophers that I really enjoy are people like David Enoch, Russ Schaefer Landau, who is my advisor. These are both moral realist philosophers. But and then Peter Van Inwagen, who does a lot of philosophy of religion. So he does a lot on the problem of evil and free will and metaphysics. I mean, he's like one of the best philosophers that's, like in the last 50 years or so. So those are three big names. I mean, I could probably say more, but yeah, those are the big ones.
So as a professor of philosophy, have you had like any memorable experiences of like any philosophy student or, any experience like talking to somebody in your office hours or maybe going back and forth or anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it happens a lot actually, which I love. I mean, that's part of why I wanted to do this. And when it happens, so a lot of times it'll happen like after a lecture, a student will be really interested in that issue, and so they'll come to office hours afterwards, where we talk. Like I have office hours for an hour or two, and we'll just talk about stuff. We'll argue about whatever it is. So this happened a lot, and I taught political philosophy. A few times, and like students love arguing about that, which I like arguing about it too. So I'm happy for them to come there. And I sort of see myself a lot in these students who like it because I wanted to do that when I was their age. This happens with grad students too. So there are a lot of grad students who are trying to publish papers, and so they want to argue about, or they want to test out ideas on me. So they come in, sit down, and we just talk about their ideas. So yeah, it happens all the time. It's actually one of the great joys of the job. That's really what I want to do. Grading is terrible when it comes to teaching, but that's only just a small sliver of it. Most of it is talking about philosophy with people, which is like that's what I wanted to do. That's why I went to grad school, to be a philosopher, is to talk with people about ideas.
With that being said, would you consider this your dream job?
Absolutely. Actually, yeah, in every sense. So not only like being a philosopher, but actually this job at Purdue is for many reasons like just great. It's like a total dream job. I feel like the luckiest person in the world. I really like, it was not reasonable going into it to think that I would get a job this, attractive, but turned out that way, which, I'm thrilled with. And yeah, just in terms of like the location and the money and the workload and the things I get to do and like the people I get to talk to, my colleagues, like it's just turned out insane. So yeah, it's great.
Perfect. So now let's start moving into some like deeper philosophical stuff. Let's talk about some of your work. can you tell the audience about some of the views that you defend in your research?
Sure. So, yeah, what are some views? So, I guess in general, a lot of my stuff defends a view called moral realism, which is a view about the status of morality. So, most of us think that, there are things that you morally ought to do and morally ought not to do. And a question that comes up is like, okay, but like, where does that come from? Like, where do the facts about what I morally ought to do and ought not to do come from? One natural thing that a lot of people think is like, oh, well, we just make that up. Society just sort of like agrees on some stuff about what we ought to do. But I don't think that's a very satisfactory answer. I mean, first of all, I didn't agree. Nobody asked me. I didn't agree to anything about morality. Nobody asked me like what should be morally right and morally wrong. So like, even if like lots of other people like agreed on something, I don't care about that. So like, I also think like, if we just look at me, like Eric, you have views about rightness and wrongness. Maybe you're the one who makes it all up. Maybe it's just you. But then I think like, no, when I think that like I shouldn't, push someone off a building, like it's not because like I don't like that. It's true I don't like that and I don't want to do that, but that's because I think that it would be terrible. I think it would be evil and I think it would be like harmful to them. That's why I think that it would be morally wrong. It has nothing to do with my attitudes. If you ask me, why would it be wrong? It's not, well, because I don't like that kind of thing. No, I don't like that kind of thing because it's wrong. Yeah, I think even if I did like that kind of thing, it's not the kind of thing that I ought to be doing. So all that's a big, long way of saying like, when it comes to this question of where morality comes from, I think the answer is not from human beings. That is not from our attitudes, not our judgments about these things or what we like or what we care about or anything like that. Instead, I think what we like and what we care about is sensitive to, or it's we like what we like, or we think that we ought to do what we ought to do because we're picking up on these mind-independent truths about how human beings ought to behave. So that's a view called moral realism. It's the view that there are moral truths and that the truths are what they are, not because of anything about our attitudes. Very similar to mathematical realism, according to which 2 + 2 is 4, not because anybody agreed on that. It's not as though like a bunch of math professors got together and decided that 2 + 2 = 4. Instead, they discovered that truth. They came to see that it's true and therefore come to believe that 2 + 2 is 4. So yeah, another way to say it is moral realism is the view that the moral truths are discovered, not invented. Whereas like, the days of the week's facts are totally invented. Like today is what, Sunday? So yeah, it's Sunday. Why? Because we agreed on it. Like there's no like mind independent fact about what day of the week it is. So morality is not like that on my view, the realist view. It's instead like the mathematical facts or like the physics facts, how many diameters is the, how many meters is the diameter of the earth? I don't know, but there's some fact of the matter and it doesn't depend on any of us. We go discover that fact. We don't invent it.
And what are some other views that people defend in the literature?
So another view is called the error theory. It's basically nihilism about morality. It's the view that it's true that we talk about morality. We talk about what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. But as a matter of fact, all of that talk is mistaken. It's in error. That's why it's the error theory. So it's error theorists take the attitude toward morality that atheists take towards God stuff. So atheists know that people talk about God. They think they're praying to God. They think they're in a relationship with God, but their view is there's no such being. And error theorists are like that, but with morality. They think, yeah, people talk about morality, what morally ought to do, what's just and unjust. They're wrong. There's no such thing. And so all of our claims about rightness and wrongness are totally false. That's one view. Another view is constructivism, according to which there are truths about morality, but they depend on our attitudes in some way or other. How do they depend on our attitudes? There are lots of different views about how that could be. One like very simple view is just moral relativism. It's the view that the moral truths are constructed out of our judgments about what's right and wrong. So abortion is wrong if the people in your culture judge that it's wrong, if most of them judge that it's wrong, and it's permissible if most of the people judge that it's permissible. So that's one kind of view. It's constructivism because it says, well, first there are these judgments about what's right and wrong, and out of that you get the facts about what's right and wrong. So rightness and wrongness is constructed out of more fundamental stuff like our judgments about what's good and bad, or our approvals and disapprovals. So that's one view, constructivism. Another view is another sort of constructivist view is Kantian constructivism, where that says that here it says there are moral truths and about what you morally ought to do and not do, but they depend on what every possible being would be committed to if they thought very carefully about it. And I don't know if you want to go through the whole argument, but basically the idea is, look, any creature who acts, who tries to do things in the world, is the kind of creature that must regard themselves as intrinsically morally valuable. But if you regard yourself as intrinsically morally valuable, you want to ask, like, why is that? And the Kantians think if you think hard enough about it, you'll see the reason you're valuable in and of yourself is because you can value other things. So you are yourself a source of all value. But if that's true of you, that's also true of every human being. And that means that you ought to treat every human being as an end in themselves, or as a source of value themselves, which means that they're very precious, which means you shouldn't do all kinds of things to them, like, kill them, coerce them, torture them, enslave them, all that kind of stuff. You shouldn't do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've heard before in like a previous interview that you said that like if you weren't a moral realist, that would probably be the view that you would accept. Is that still true?
I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, I waffle between that view and the error theory, where I would just be like, well, I guess there's no such thing as morality. But I think, yeah, at the end of the day, I probably would be a constructivist, a Kantian constructivist, because I think, I mean, the claim that you shouldn't just, like, I don't know, throw your own children off buildings seems as clearly true to me as basically any philosophical claim you could appeal to try to build a philosophical theory. I mean, it's important to keep in mind that, like, basically any philosophical theory or any philosophical view is going to have to draw on claims that are themselves either supported by still further arguments, in which case you'll need to draw on claims, and then you'll want to know, well, why should I accept those claims? It'll either bottom out in it'll either be arguments all the way down, or you're going to have to draw on claims that start with some intrinsic probability, that is, or intrinsic plausibility, that just strikes you as true. So the view that you shouldn't do all kinds of terrible things, like throw people off buildings or burn them alive, strikes me as as solid a claim on which to build a philosophical theory as you can get. And constructivism would respect that claim, whereas the error theory wouldn't. Other views might not respect that claim either, and so that's why I would probably default. If realism is false, I would then go to constructivism.
Okay, perfect. So when it comes to moral realism, it seems like in the literature there's kind of like the robust form of moral realism and like more of a relaxed form of moral realism, where they don't necessarily want to posit the moral properties like being like these real things, but the moral facts are still just as true as anything else. What kind of view would you say that you would accept?
Yeah, so I'm in the more robust realist camp. So that is, I think that, look, there are moral properties and facts, and they commit us ontologically to things. Like, we have to let them in our ontology. So we are committed to there being such truths. And we're as committed to those sorts of truths as we are mathematical truths or modal truths, that is, about what's possible and what's necessary, about, grounding truths, about like what grounds what. So a lot of people think like the brain grounds our conscious experiences, or our conscious experiences are grounded in facts about our brain. That means that there's a metaphysical dependence relation between those. So like that sort of metaphysically commits you to some stuff. And I think, yeah, insofar as we're making moral claims, we're metaphysically committed to stuff. Whereas the relaxed realists tend to say, no, it can be true that murder is wrong, but that doesn't commit us to any the existence of anything. It doesn't commit us to any sort of properties or any sort of anything. It's, in this sense, the relaxed realists are committed to, they say, look, our view is metaphysically light. We're not ontologically committed to something. Very difficult to make sense of what is actually being asserted by that view. But, some people say it, and some smart people have said it. So, yeah.
Okay. So what are some arguments that, you probably will put forth for more realism?
So there are many that you could go at. I mean, my favorite, and this is actually the one that, it's the one that is the reason that I am a realist. And if I had reason to think that this argument isn't any good, I would, seriously doubt my realism. But it's basically it's not a very philosophically sophisticated argument, but I think, who cares? Like, we're not trying to be sophisticated here. We're trying to get at the truth. And I think, this is as good an argument as you can get in philosophy. So philosophical arguments, as I pointed out earlier, just have to begin with, some claims that strike you as plausible and they lead to a certain conclusion. So here's an argument that really is true. It goes like this. Hey, look, it's morally wrong to burn people alive just for the reading light that it provides. So, you could fill in like any sort of morally heinous thing. It's wrong to enslave your own children, or it's wrong to whatever. But yeah, it's wrong to burn people alive just, because it provides some reading. Like that's a very, like, that would be evil, it'd be stupid. If it's wrong to do that, then there's at least one moral truth. So there's at least one moral truth. Okay, great. So we got one moral truth. That's not yet realism, because even constructivists agree that there is at least one moral truth. So where's the realism coming in? Well, you just add this. The fact that it would be wrong to burn people alive for the reading light it provides doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes. If we think carefully about, like, why would it be wrong to burn someone alive? Everyone except error theorists agrees that it would be wrong. Why would it be wrong? Well, would it be wrong because I think it's wrong? No, I think it's wrong. The mere fact that I say something is wrong doesn't make it wrong. That'd be, wild. It'd be like the Eric command theory or something like this. Is just like, that's a terrible theory. It's stupid. Is it wrong because, like, people in America tend to, like, look down on burning people alive? Nope, it doesn't. It seems like even if there were no America, it would still be wrong. Even if everybody in America said it was right, it'd still be wrong. Is it wrong because, I don't know, like, if we asked everybody in the world, most people would, be, no, it seems like even if most people in the world said it was okay, it still wouldn't be right. So if you could just go through, like, the list of things it might depend on in terms of our attitudes, and it doesn't look like there's any sort of set of attitudes that's going to make it the case that it's wrong to burn people alive for the reading light it provides. It seems like when I am aware of this fact that it would be wrong, what I'm getting a grip on is the fact, the reality, a fact about moral reality, that it's wrong to do this kind of thing. And if that's right, if it's wrong to burn people alive for the reading light it provides, and it doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes, then that means that that's a stance independent moral truth, which is what realists are committed to. So that's how you get to the realism. So yeah, it's wrong to burn people alive for the reading light it provides, and it doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes. So there are some moral truths. They don't depend on our attitudes, and we can come to know them. That's basically what realism is committed to. So that's why I'm a realist.
So there has been some kind of like pushback recently against people like Lance Bush, for example, who just can't make sense of categorical normativity. What would you say for people that are like that?
Yeah. So I do hear, this. I've heard this online. You don't hear it much among philosophers. I guess. I have many reactions. One reaction is like, well, sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I understand what I mean. Lots of other people seem to know what I mean. Error theorists know what I mean. Constructivists seem to know what I mean. Lots of people who deny that there are stance independent moral truths seem to know exactly what's being claimed. They just don't think that there are such things, but they don't deny that they can't understand what that is. So I guess if you know what a reason is, if you know what it is for something to, for one thing to favor another, most of us understand that, like, you should, if you're hungry, you should go get something to eat. Why? Well, because by getting something to eat, you'll, relieve your hunger, and that's what you're worried about. So you see that, right? Most people see that. Now we might ask, like, well, what makes it the case that when you're hungry, you ought to go eat something? One answer is, because that would satisfy my desire, and desire satisfaction is good, or something like that. Or another one is like, well, because it would help you survive, and it's good for you to survive. My own view is that it's good for you to survive, and it's good for you to be, not be distracted by your hunger or something like that. So when I say that, I mean that it's not like you regard it as good. It's in fact good. So it doesn't depend on your attitudes. So, we understand what it is for there to be a reason for you to go get something to eat. All I want to say is, and the reason that you have is some fact that doesn't depend on anyone's attitude. Here's another case. So, like, if there's a drowning child, most people agree that you should go save the child. Why should you go save the child? My own view is you should save the child because it will cause suffering to his family, and the kid is valuable in his own right. It's valuable for his own sake. He's intrinsically valuable, and when something's valuable, you should try to preserve it or protect it. That's why you should go save him. Now, so I just told you why I should go save him. Most people are not like, what? What are you talking about? You should go save him because he's valuable? I don't even understand what you're talking about. But note what I did there was I cited a reason to go save the kid. And the reason is because he's valuable. The fact that he's valuable doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes. He's valuable not because I value him, but because he's good. He's good for his own sake. Most people sort of understand. They don't like have any sort of like, what are you talking about at any point? But all I've done there is I've just said, look, that's a reason to go do a thing. and it's a stance independent reason. It holds not in virtue of anyone's attitudes. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You could say like, well, I just don't get it. And look, I mean, for anything that you're trying to explain to someone, if they just keep saying, I don't get it, I don't get it, I don't get it, then at some point you're gonna have to say, well, I don't know, maybe philosophy's not your thing. Maybe you should go do something else, or I don't know what else to tell you. But you asked me like, what do you say to those kinds of people? These are the kinds of things that will come out of my mouth. Mm-hmm. If they're not satisfied with them, then from there I'm like, I don't have much more to say. I don't know what to. I want to help, but I don't know what else to say.
So what about the worry? Perhaps. What about the worry that it seems maybe like we'd have to commit ourselves to something extra, including categorical normativity? So perhaps we might think this is kind of, it seems like this is what Olson was referring to in this 2014 book, Moral Error Theory, that we could account for reasons just in terms of like instrumental, like if this corresponds to the satisfaction of my desires or the fulfillment of my goals or something of that sort. And we could account for every single talk of reasons or anything of that sort, including the examples you gave. Maybe like the reason why I should go eat is because I have the goal of staying alive and I'm hungry right now. And so, if I don't eat, then I will die or something of that sort. And if I didn't have that kind of desire or goal, then I really wouldn't have that reason. What is your kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, so Olson is a normative error theorist. So he says, look, to the extent that we have any reasons at all, they're only like these purely descriptive facts. So like maybe you have a reason to, get something to eat, but all that means is you desire to get something to eat. And there's a way, the most efficient way of doing that, or like one way of doing that, is to go get something to eat. So like but notice that all those are purely descriptive claims. They're not normative claims. And he's like, yeah, that's right. Because I don't believe that there's any normativity at all. I'm not just a moral error theorist. I'm a everything error theorist. So he doesn't think that there are reasons for belief, except for this, like you want to believe the truth and the evidence suggests that P is true. So he doesn't think you have a reason to believe P. He just thinks the most efficient way to satisfy your desire is for you to believe P. So that's not a reason because there's no normative language. It's all descriptive. You desire to believe P, or you desire to believe the truth. P is true. So given that desire, the best way to satisfy it is to believe P. All purely descriptive things. Now, once you say, oh, but so there you have no reasons at all on that view. I happen to think that no, there, in addition to all these descriptive facts that you just pointed out, Olson, it's also the case that I have a reason to believe P. It would be a good idea. I'd be justified in believing P. It makes sense for me to believe P. I would be rational if I believe P. All those terms that I just used, I have a good reason. It would be a good idea. It would be rational. We justify. Those are all normative terms, which means that there's a reason. That is, there's something favoring doing that. So I think you can say there just are no reasons facts, but I guess I think you're leaving out something like as plausible as anything in philosophy. That is that you have reasons for belief, you have reasons for action, and he's willing to say no. Now there's some people who aren't willing to go as far as Olson. They're saying, no, you do have reasons, but the only reasons that you have are to satisfy your desires. Now, one question about that is, it sounds like one way of hearing that is you're committed to the idea that here's a stance independent truth. Whenever you can satisfy your desires, you ought to do it. Is that what you mean? Do you mean that anytime there's a desire that you have a reason to satisfy it, like you ought to go satisfy it? If so, then that means that you're committed to this sort of stance independent claim that you should go, that what you ought to do is go satisfy your desires. Instead, what you might mean is no, because I don't want to be committed to these stance independent truths including the stance independent truth that I ought to go satisfy my desires. So you might just say, no, what a reason is just, some fact that will help you satisfy your desires or something like that. Then I guess I'd want to know, why is that the case? I mean, that's certainly not just what the word reason means. It doesn't fall out of the word reason. So why would that be? I mean, I guess some people would say, oh, well, because I don't want to be committed to any metaphysical stuff. I guess I'd want to say, I don't have those, I'm not worried about that at all. I guess I think, look, the world is weird. We've always known it's weird. If we need to have favoring relations to explain very commonsensical claims, like you ought to believe the truth, even if you want to believe, what's pleasant to you, you still ought not to do that. You ought to believe the truth, and you ought to not stab people. Even if you really want to stab them, you shouldn't stab them. In order to accommodate those sorts of claims, we need these stance-independent normative truths. And so if you say to me like, oh, but those are spooky, you're appealing to something like a principle of parsimony. But the principle of parsimony says you shouldn't multiply entities beyond necessity. Necessity for what? Necessity for accounting for the phenomenon that you're trying to explain and understand. So what I would say is I'm not violating any principle of parsimony when I appeal to stance-independent normative truths. What I'm trying to account for is the data as it seems to me. That is the claims that seem true to me. I'm trying to account for all of those, including the claim that you ought to save that kid. You ought to save that kid even if you don't want to. The only way to account for that is to countenance stance-independent normative reasons. I'm not violating a principle of parsimony because I didn't multiply entities beyond necessity. I need them to account for the normative truth, the normative reality that we're trying to understand. So I think when people appeal to parsimony, they feel pretty good about that because it sounds like something that's coming from the sciences. It sounds like they're very, very serious, and they're very, but that's a mistake. They're sort of, first of all, the sciences don't even use it like that. They don't just count up the number of entities in two theories and say, oh, well, this theory has fewer entities, so that one wins. No. If one of the theories that countenances fewer things, but it doesn't explain all the things that they were trying to explain, that's not a better theory. Parsimony kicks in only when all things are equal. And so if the error theorists can't explain why we have reasons to hold certain beliefs or to, act morally in some ways, then they haven't accounted for all the truths that there are. If all things aren't equal, the realists can account for some things that the error theorists can't. So parsimony doesn't kick in. It kicks in only when all things are equal. Okay, that was a big long way.
And do you think that's the biggest pitfall for like error theorists, is that they are not able to account for, the evidence? At least it seems that we have these reasons, to believe certain things and something of that sort.
It's part of the problem. I mean, like if they had excellent reasons to not to countenance these sorts of things, that may be one thing. But basically, the kinds of things that they're worried about are these things like, oh, well, parsimony in some vague sense, like, oh, well, it commits us to an extra thing. As I've just said, like, I'm not, so what? Like, we're trying to account for all the data in the domain. So sometimes we got to do that. Scientists do that all the time, too. If there's things about the domain they're trying to understand, they haven't explained it all, they might have to introduce a new entity to try to explain what's going on here. That's all I've done. So I think the reasons that they have to deny that there are moral facts or stance-independent normative truths, I think, are not very good. I mean, in principle, you could have good reasons to doubt what seems obviously true to us, but the kinds of reasons they have is, well, that would be queer. And what they mean is like, that would be weird. Or, Bart Strumer has a book defending the error theory, and he goes through like 9 steps appealing to like 9 different highly controversial metaphysical claims. And I think like, look, I mean, in order for that argument to succeed, like all these like really controversial, like really, general abstract claims would have to be true. And I've just been in philosophy long enough to know that those probably aren't true. Like for any sort of argument for a really controversial claim, there's almost always like really strong premises in there that are highly controversial, not intuitively obvious. So almost certainly the argument's not going to succeed. And so I think like error theorists, you just don't have like in order to deny that there are any moral truths or any facts about what you ought to believe, you got to have really excellent evidence. And the kind of evidence they're bringing is stuff like, well, that would be weird. And I think you're going to need to do better than that.
So I see that you're making reference to like the argument from queerness. So what is your response to that? I mean, it seems like it's a very compelling argument, starting from J.L. Mackie, going on to Olson, and it's convinced a lot of people to transition from maybe, moral facts do exist to it seems like all of our moral statements, at least on the face of them, if they're employing categorical normativity, seem to be false. So how do you kind of respond to that kind of argument?
Yeah, so the first thing you got to do is understand like what is being said by. So the charge is, hey, you guys are committed to the stance-independent moral facts, things like you ought to go save kids even if you don't want to because they're valuable or something like that. Shouldn't throw people off buildings because they're valuable. Okay, that's weird. That's metaphysically weird. Well, what do you mean by weird? A lot of different interpretations. Mackie had 4. There's like 4 different interpretations of what Mackie was doing. One thing he was saying was, well, the moral truths, if they were there, would be the kinds of things that would motivate us to act in accordance with them. But lots of people aren't motivated to act in accordance with them. So there must not be any moral truths. And the thing to say to that is, nope, realists are not committed to the idea that if there's a moral truth that you will be motivated to act in accordance with it. Not even if you recognize the moral truth. We don't say that you'll be motivated to act in accordance with it. You could be moral dirtbag. That is, you know what the moral truths are, you just don't want to do them. That's called a morally bad person. So we're not denying that there are morally bad people, and we're not saying that like the moral truths are such that they'll like grab your motivational structure and like pull you to go do the right things. So that can't. So if that's what you mean by queerness, we'll just say like we weren't committed to that, and we never said that. So like that's not a commitment of our view. You haven't successfully defeated our view. Another thing you might mean is, oh well, it would require a very queer as like weird faculty to come to recognize what the moral truths are. You need something like moral intuition, and that sounds like some spooky, like weird thing that you'd have to like detect the moral truths. The thing to say to that is, nope, you don't think that you have to have this weird, faculty. You just need a mind or a brain, and you need to be able to reason about what's good, what's bad. You need to be able to think about counterfactual cases. So the way, if you take an ethics class, if you think when you're thinking about, well, what's morally right, what's morally wrong, what you're going to do is consider lots of cases. You're going to make some intuitive judgments about them. You're going to try to make them coherent with your other intuitive judgments. You're going to make judgments about individual cases, about general principles. You're going to try to bring those in conformity with one another. But the whole time, like you're never using like some like weird faculty to like just immediately grab the truths. The whole time you're using your mind. I mean, if you just think about what ethicists do, if you take a normative ethics class or an applied ethics class, at no point are they like pulling out some weird faculty or like, some weird appendage out of their body to like detect the moral truths. They're just using their reason. So we're not committed to some weird faculty of intuition. We are committed to, intuition, but it's not a weird faculty. It's the same faculty that literally everyone uses in philosophy. Any argument in philosophy, as I've said, is going to have to, at some point, bottom out in its intuitive plausibility. That is, when you reflect on the claim that has just been offered to you, you have to think to yourself, does that sound plausible? When you're doing that, what you're doing is you're using your intuition. Are you using some weird faculty? Not as far as I can tell, but suppose you are using a weird faculty. Okay, literally everyone has to use it all the same. So realists are not in some specially problematic boat here. We all have to assess claims on the basis of their intuitive plausibility, how they strike us. So I don't think the weird faculty argument's going to succeed. What's another one? Maybe it's weird in this sense that the moral facts are supposed to supervene on the non-moral facts. And that's weird because it seems like moral facts and non-moral facts are two totally distinct kinds of things. But somehow it's true that every time there's a murder, there's wrongness. How could it be that every time there's a murder, there's wrongness? These are two totally different kinds of properties. Couldn't it be the case that there's a murder, but there's no wrongness? Like, why couldn't that be the case? They're two totally different things. So it's totally weird that they would co-vary or that they would be supervenient on one another in this way. And the right response to that is, there's an explanation for why that's the case. And that's because there are true fundamental normative principles. You ask if you want to know, like, well, what do you think the fundamental normal principles are, Eric? I don't have a story about that, but I could just say, like, for instance, if utilitarianism is true, suppose that what you morally ought to do is maximize utility. Why is it the case that every time there's a murder, there's wrongness? It's because, in most cases where there's a murder, there's wrongness. And the answer is because that's a failure to maximize utility. And the moral principle that's true, that governs where the moral properties, how moral properties will be distributed across non-moral worlds or across non-moral properties, just says, like, every time you get an instance of failing to maximize utility, you're going to get wrongness. And most murders are failing to maximize utility. So that's why you get wrongness. There's an explanation for it. It's not weird. It's not mysterious.
Okay.
Maybe I'll stop there for now.
Okay, cool. So, in one of your papers, the Moorean arguments against the error theory, you advanced on page 17 this kind of argument, and I'll just lay it out real quick since it's very brief. If my vivid memory of having toast for breakfast is a reason to believe that I had toast for breakfast, then there is at least one normative truth, and the normative error theory is false. My vivid memory of having toast for breakfast is a reason to believe that I had toast for breakfast. Therefore, there's at least one normative truth, and the normative error theory is false. And so, over the course of our conversation, it seems like you're implying this kind of like parity argument between like the moral truths and like epistemic truths, or like moral facts and epistemic facts, and so on and so forth. Did you, when you were like looking at the kind of companion and guilt argument, did you really enjoy that, like from Roland and Terence Cuneo from the normative web and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are tons of parallels between the epistemic domain and the moral domain. And it's worth exploring those, especially when you're arguing with people who think there's no such thing as morality. There's no such thing as like, there being reasons for you to act in certain ways. But most people, so, I mean, that's, controversial in some ways, but what's far less controversial is the idea that there are things that you ought to believe, whether you want to believe them or not. Most people think that, if that you ought to believe in accordance with the evidence, that if, some claim is like wildly under supported by evidence, there's just excellent evidence against it and not much evidence for it, then you shouldn't believe it. But what if I want to believe it? What if I like really like that kind of thing? It's really amusing to me to believe it. Most people are like, yeah, you still shouldn't believe it. You shouldn't believe it no matter what your attitudes are. Well, that's a commitment to stance independent truths about what you ought to believe. And so the idea here is, look, if you're already committed to the idea that there are stance independent truths about what you ought to believe, then you shouldn't find it problematic that there are stance independent truths about how you ought to behave. These are just stance independent favoring relations. One is between a fact and what you ought to believe, and others are between a fact and how you ought to act. If you think there's something spooky and weird and oh my god about the moral stuff, then you should think the same thing about the epistemic stuff, and you should just reject all of them. But most people don't want to do that. They want to say, no, there's facts about what you ought to believe, independent of anyone's attitudes. And for that, we say, well, if you're committed to that, it's not problematic at all to then additionally be committed to stance independent truths about how you ought to act. So that's another argument for realism. It begins with the idea that, look, you got to treat these the same. Your reasons for belief and reasons for action, you got to treat them the same. So if you're going to deny stance independent reasons for action, you should also deny stance independent reasons for belief. Many people don't want to do that, and so the realist says, great, so then you should be on our team. You should be a realist. And if you don't want to be a realist, then don't go around making claims about what you stance independently ought to believe, because what you don't see is that's inconsistent with your views about morality. You should be an error theorist about it all, and that's a higher cost. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Of course you can do it, but the idea is be honest about what your view really in fact commits you to, all the implausibilities it does in fact commit you to.
So you are. It seems that you're correct about the fact that like a lot of error theorists would tend not to want to accept, like that there are moral truths and stuff and so on and so forth. But then they do, at least some of them, want to accept that there is epistemic like facts. That there is reasons to believe, and these reasons perhaps are categorically normative. In fact, Cowie tried to defend that kind of thought, and he said, well, it seems that epistemic facts have a special property of being indispensable perhaps to our best collection of beliefs, but moral facts aren't. So we can do away with moral facts, but we still need epistemic facts. And he tried to draw this like parity between that kind of argument and like Quine's indispensability argument for mathematical facts. What do you think about the kind of special property argument?
Yeah, I had not heard that one. I mean, the thing that strikes me at first is like that would show that there's one argument for mind independent epistemic facts that doesn't exist for mind independent moral facts. But it still strikes me that this claim is still true. Look, there's this. So if Cowie's right, then there are stance independent facts about what you ought to believe. I guess I think why most people think, or at least many people think, that there are stance independent facts about how you ought to behave. What's supposed to be problem? Like, why shouldn't we just go on believing that? Because the reason we were supposed to say, we're often told like, no, you can't believe in that, is because there's something weird about stance independent facts about about what favors what. If Cowie's happy to say, well, there isn't anything weird about stance independent facts about what you ought to believe, but there is about morality, the question is like, why? I get the disanalogy here is, well, there's one argument for for epistemic facts, but not for moral facts. I guess I think, cool, but that doesn't mean there's an argument against moral facts. We still haven't heard an argument against moral facts. And we already know that, mind independent favoring relations between facts and beliefs are totally unproblematic. So I guess I still like, why shouldn't I think that, our moral beliefs are in good shape, even if there's not an indispensability for them? Why shouldn't I think they're in perfectly good shape? I haven't, heard anything problematic about them.
Okay, perfect. So concerning like the kind of parity argument, I guess I would just go with a different form of response from like Jonas Olson. He kind of explored this response in 2018, and I asked him about it, and he kind of doesn't know whether if he likes this kind of response or the one concerning like epistemic facts relating to our goals and so on and so forth. But he has this kind of thought in his 2018 paper that we can kind of get epistemic facts as a function of our beliefs. So it's a part of the very function of believing things that we're going to be believing in correspondence with evidence, and that we're going to, try to look for truths, because otherwise we have no purpose in believing in the first place, or at least something of that sort. What would you think about that?
Yeah, so here the idea is like, oh, well, the point of believing is to, believe the truth or something like that. Maybe that's the point of believing. I guess from there, what follows? So it's the point of believing is to get the truth. There are certain facts out there that are true or that favor believing certain things as true. And then I'd want to know, first of all, where did this point of the point of beliefs come from? Like, it sounds like purpose or like the goal. Like where do these goals come from? So that's the first question. The second question is, suppose there is such a thing. Are the facts about what favors achieving that goal, are they, do they depend on anyone's stances? If the answer is no, then looks like we have stance independent facts. Or take the goal of belief. Is the goal of belief something that depends on people's stances? If the answer is no, then it looks like any sort of reasons that are generated from this stance independent goal, this goal that obtains independent of anyone's stances, it looks like any of the reasons that are generated by it are also going to be stance independent reasons. It still seems like we haven't avoided that there are stance independent like facts that favor, achieving this goal that wasn't our own making, that, just has independently of anyone's attitudes.
Okay. And if you had to think about any of the problems going against moral realism, so you hear a lot of these arguments, like the argument from queerness, and perhaps a lot of the responses like that moral facts are explanatorily dispensable, or this principle of parsimony, so on and so forth. Which one do you think is the strongest? What do you think is the strongest reason not to accept moral realism?
Not to accept realism, yeah. I used to think it was disagreement. So here the idea is like, look, if there are these truths independent of our minds and we can have access to them, then we would expect there to be lots of agreement, at least among people who think carefully about these things. And so I wrote a dissertation on that, because the idea is like, look, even among the experts on morality, there's still tons of disagreement. So what would explain that? What would explain why even the experts who get the philosophers who get paid to do this stuff, even after thousands of years of arguing about what moral rightness and wrongness consists in, they still can't agree? What would explain that? Well, one thing that might explain that is the fact that there is no fact of the matter about the right and wrong ways to live. So, apparently in the old days, people used to argue about whether the moon is male or female. They'd argue back and forth, back and forth. They couldn't agree. Why not? Seems like the answer is because there's no fact of the matter. There's no facts to agree on. There's no facts guiding their judgments about whether the moon is male or female. You might think the same thing about morality. For lots and lots of reasons, I don't think that ultimately succeeds. So I used to think it's disagreement. That's a big, long way of stalling to see if I could think of another one that I think is most troubling.
Not even evolutionary debunking, like those kind of arguments?
I mean, I'm not worried about those at all. And for many reasons. I mean, one is just that I'm a theist. So I think so when you tell me hey, did you know that our moral faculties are formed by evolution? I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But that doesn't show that they're in some ways off or distorted or not going to reliably get at the truth, because I have good reason to think that God would use evolution to form our moral faculties in a way that would be reliable. So I haven't heard any evidence that, I should be worried about the accuracy of my moral judgments. So that's at least one reason I'm not worried about it. Now, there are lots of other people who are not theists, and maybe they have bigger worries in this department. But even for them, I think maybe not. But I mean, I'm happy to talk about evolutionary debunking. I guess maybe that's the next one up, is evolutionary debunking, even though I'm not terribly compelled by it. So there, the idea is hey, if there are these truths, like you realists say, independent of our minds, and our minds were formed by evolution, and evolution doesn't care about our minds matching up with the moral truths, then why should we think that we have capacities that are good at discovering the moral truths? And I guess my answer here is very similar to there are high-level mathematical truths about calculus and about far distant planets and about all kinds of like lots of different things that we know if you just go on a university campus about the very distant past. And evolution doesn't care if we know about that stuff. It's not gonna like that doesn't help us survive and reproduce. So like, how do we come to know that? And the answer is because we have. It's true, evolution doesn't care about our knowing those things, but it cares about us being able to survive and reproduce. And so it gives us capacities that are pretty good at thinking and reasoning. And because evolution gave us those things, then we can reason and think carefully about morality, about high level mathematics, about physics, about the distant past, about modality, the necessary and the possible, about what grounds what. I mean, these are all things that we can come to know and reliably so, even though evolution doesn't care at all about whether we come to form these beliefs. So I guess I'd say similar things about the moral case. Now, the standard thing to say here is, oh, but like evolution is going to distort your moral capacities because having some moral capacities or being disposed to form some judgments will help you survive and reproduce, whether or not they're true. And there, I think maybe that's true for some of our judgments. Like, I don't know. I mean, I actually happen to think incest is probably wrong, but I mean, a standard example is like, oh, well, having sex with your cousin, like that can't be. Like, that's probably not morally wrong. It's probably the only reason people like think that it's morally wrong is because like evolution made us go, yeah, when we think about that. That can't be like actually morally wrong. Actually, I'm not sure if like having sex, like if you like married your husband or whatever and has, like, is that wrong? I can believe that evolution disposed us to think that it's wrong, but as a matter of fact, it's not. But I guess I think like, yeah, so it's going to distort us to some degree. I'm not worried about that. Evolution produces a lot of people that are colorblind, and our vision, everybody's vision, is limited to some degree. We can't see all the stuff out there. Sometimes our vision, distorts things for us, and we form false beliefs on the basis. I think, yeah, evolution is going to distort our beliefs to some degree. What the evolutionary debunking people need is that it's going to irreparably distort our beliefs. It's going to ruin everything. So we have just no hope of getting at the moral truth. And there, I think, no, that's not right. I mean, if what morality is something that's loosely related to the flourishing of human beings, to their, survival, reproduction, good relationships, that sort of thing, then we would expect evolution to give us some basic judgments about like the badness of pain and the goodness of pleasure and the goodness of relationships. That's exactly what you would expect evolution to fit us with. And once we have a decent set of those sorts of true moral beliefs, and we have our rational capacities whereby we can sort of sift through the good judgments and the bad judgments. Like we can sort of think through like, oh yeah, maybe actually like having sex with your first cousin isn't intrinsically morally wrong. And evolution just, made me think that. And actually maybe evolution made me think that, raping someone is actually okay because, it like helps spread my seed. But, on reflection, I can see that actually that's probably not a good thing to do. So I think like evolution may like distort our judgments in some ways, but we have this ability to reflect on, to step back and say, am I going to go with my initial inclination to believe, or do I have good reasons to think that that's mistaken? I think what's interesting about, our rational capacities help us sort of sift through these things, and evolution gave us those, and it gave us those because, all it cared about was our survival and reproduction. But we took this thing that evolution gave us for one purpose and we used it for another. Just as like evolution gave us our hands probably to like grab food and stuff, but like we use it to type on computers. Evolution didn't give us our hands to type on computers. Who cares? We can use it for however we want. We can use our reasoning capacities that evolution did not give us to, learn the moral truths, and we can use them to learn the moral truths. That's what we do with them.
Okay, perfect. So I just have this really interesting question that I must ask you. It's kind of like, when you see in like the literature concerning morality, there seems to be this kind of in-house fighting between non-naturalists and naturalists, where we can't really, at least it seems that there's not really a true agreement concerning the, if it's just like these natural facts like happiness or something like that, or if it's sui generis. You seem to think that it's unique, that it's unlike any of the natural facts. Why?
Several reasons. I mean, the first thing is, the naturalists say that, what the moral properties are is they're identical to some natural property, where a natural property is one of the kinds of properties that the empirical sciences study. So something like, I don't know, it's going to be some kind of arrangement of particles in a certain way. So, like one common thing to say is like, goodness is identical to pleasure. It's not just that pleasure has this property of goodness. It's that pleasure and goodness are one and the same thing. And there, I think, why don't you hold that view, Eric? So the long story short, for any identification of what the moral properties are, it just doesn't sound plausible to me. You might say goodness is maximizing utility, or goodness is what you would desire to desire, or something like that. But it looks like for any sort of identification that naturalists provide of what the moral properties are, I can think of things that have that moral property, but aren't identical to that thing that they said it was. And if that's correct, then that means that goodness and rightness and wrongness and all the moral properties are not going to be identical to any of those things. And then you begin to think like, oh, probably what these moral properties are some property that isn't that co-varies or is grounded in the natural facts, but isn't itself identical to any of those. So I guess I'm happy to say that pleasure grounds goodness. That is, goodness is realized by pleasure, but goodness is also realized by achievement, and it's realized by friendship, and it's realized by virtue, and it's realized by satisfaction with your life or knowledge or something like that. So I guess I think goodness is multiply realizable. It's realizable by lots of things. So it's not identical to any of those things. And how could that be? It's because goodness is a property that's its own kind. It's sui generis, as non-naturalists often say. It's its own kind of property that's not identical to any of the things that the natural sciences study. So how do we come to know about it if we didn't do science to do it? You got to do philosophy. I mean, that's how you come to know what the moral truths are. You use your reason to get a grip on these things, just as the mathematical truths are not identical to any natural property. Two-ness is not, you're not going to find two-ness in the world. It's not composed of any atom. So how do we know about two-ness? How do we know about, the Pythagorean theorem? How do we know about any of these things? We used our rational reflection. There are mathematical properties, but they're not identical to anything in the world. There are modal properties, but they're truths about what's necessary and possible. But they're not identical to any arrangement of particles in the world. So I guess I think there are lots of these kinds of properties. There are truths about probabilities, that is, the propensities of certain events to come to be. And those aren't identical to any, natural properties. I guess I think the moral truths are like this too. They're not unique in any sort of scary way. They're unique in this sense that they're different from the natural properties, but they're not, unique in a sense that oh my gosh, there's nothing we've never heard of anything like this. Of course you have. The mathematical properties, the logical properties, the modal properties, they're all like this. So the moral properties are in good standing.
Perfect. Well, it was great having you on. But to conclude, I wanted to ask you some rapid fire questions. You can answer just as soon as you possibly can think of the answer. Answer. Ready?
Yep.
If you could meet any philosopher, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Plato's my first thought. Plato.
Why?
Oh yeah, why? Just incredible breadth of philosophical knowledge, the artistry. So in addition to just being a philosophical mind at getting at the truth, just the artistry of it all was just incredible. If you read the Republic, just in addition to being good philosophy, it's just good literature. It's just, and the idea that some dude in ancient Greece just was could just produce this, and the volume that he did is really mind-boggling. I don't really know how he did it. I can't imagine. So I just want to know how did that person do that? Let me talk to him. Yeah.
Okay. Dualism or physicalism?
Dualism for sure. Physicalism is a intellectual fad. It's there's a moment where idealism, the idea that all of reality is mental, had a time from Kant to the early 1900s. Everybody was an idealist. But the time of believing in the Olympian gods was a big thing. All the intellectuals believed it. The time of believing in the Romans gods was a big thing. Everybody believed it. Look, there's lots of intellectual fads. I think physicalism is just a thing that's here now. People got really impressed with science, and they thought everything is about the scientific world. I think future generations are going to look back on us and laugh at us and think we're goofy in the way that we think that people who believed in the Olympian gods are goofy.
Okay. Property dualism or substance dualism?
Yeah, good question. I guess I tend to be a substance dualist. That is, I guess I think that I am myself just this totally distinct entity that isn't merely causally co-varying with certain it doesn't emerge out of physical stuff. I think I'm like totally distinct from it. I could exist totally without a body. And yeah, I'm like my own substance. So like I'm Cartesian and Platonic in that sense, I guess.
Okay. If you weren't a philosopher, what other career would you pursue?
I guess I'd be a basketball coach and a high school and a high school economics teacher. Yeah.
Okay, cool. If you only had one superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, first thought is flight, but that's too common. Maybe like knowing what other people are thinking. Is that, yeah, maybe knowing
Hmm.
what other people are thinking. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Why? I don't know. I'm nosy. I guess I just want to know other people's business. I don't know. So yeah, like, uh, I just want to know like how like I have lots of experiences, I have lots of thoughts. I want to know how common my thoughts are, how common my experiences are. I want to know how crazy other people's lives are. I don't know. I'm just yeah, I'm nosy and like yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Would you rather embrace solipsism or eliminative materialism?
Ooh, I hate both, but I guess I would go with oh man, I guess a limited materialism because I guess on that view I like as like I wouldn't exist and not at least not in any deep sense that all there is. So on that view, there's like no like beliefs or desires or any of these high level things. There's just like the very like low level firings in my brain and stuff like that. But there's no like Eric that unifies them or anything like that. So would I rather like be the only one in existence or like no one exists? And I guess I'd rather not exist than like
Okay,
you know
cool.
like my body would exist, but not like the like not me.
Not you, the
Yeah.
soul, the real Eric.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, dogs or cats?
Probably cats, I guess. I like both in some sense. I don't have cats. I'll just go cats.
Cats.
Why? Because they're a little less in your face. Like I like that they're like very chill and like you have to. It's an achievement when you get them to like be around you and want to be around you, and I like that.
What's your favorite genre of music?
Oh no. I am the worst with music. I when I was in high school, I was like super into like emo stuff. Like I had no problems. Like I didn't have like any like, like I had like the most chill and like, privileged life of all time. Not privileged, but like, like things went well in my life. But I got super into emo, so I still listen to that to some degree. So I guess I'll go with that. Though I mean, I listen to a lot of stuff. I grew up in Nashville, so I listen to a ton of country from like the '90s and stuff. Like, no, I still like that.
Okay. And my last question is, what movie should everyone go watch right now if they haven't already?
Oh my gosh. You know, hard to say, but I'll just say one that like I don't hear people talking about that I really loved. It's you'll want to watch it once and then never again, but it's a movie by Martin Scorsese called Silence. It's about these missionaries, these Catholic missionaries. Even if you don't care about like that kind of stuff, like it's still like it's really about a struggle, these people trying to do this thing. But they're Catholic missionaries from Spain. They go to Japan where everybody hates them and is like, get out of our country. And they're like, no. And then, they try to convert people and they just it's very hard. It's really, if you don't care about the religious stuff, it's about like how human beings can like survive all sorts of like just horrendous treatment and torture and getting beat to crap and just continue to go after this thing. Why? Because they have this mission and they have this vision of like the good and like what, benefiting other people and all this kind of stuff. And so they're like willing to do anything, including die and get ripped to pieces, just to achieve this goal. And so there's like I don't know. I don't know. Why does anybody watch these Rocky movies or like these movies where people like overcome great odds? I don't know. That's just that. Yeah.
Sounds like a horrific but beautiful movie. Thank
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
Eric Sampson.
Yeah.
That will conclude the interview.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.